And now, of course, the big question is, how do we get into this flow state, this holy state where we forget who we are and everything is going automatically because our attention is just being absorbed or grabbed by the things that we are doing? The key to getting rid of the chaos in your mind and getting some peace of mind is to integrate the knowledge. So it's all about integration, and in this video I'm going to explain what integration means and also what this little beautiful feather has to do with that. So I want you to imagine that you are standing in Yosemite Park, in the national park, and the trees are rising high above you and you're looking up to this gigantic mountain and remembering that 5 years ago you started climbing and you had no idea about how to integrate all of this knowledge that you now have about climbing. So you start climbing, you know exactly how much grip your fingers have and where to put your toes and how to balance yourself against the wall. You start climbing, you totally forget where you are and who you are. Your sense of self dissolves and you kind of merge with the wall. And when you're halfway across the wall, you put your hand on a ridge and you're startled because a bird flies away and you find a little feather, but you look closely and the feather is all like teared up. And when you look closely to this feather, it reminds you to your early days as a climber, where all of the knowledge that you used to have about climbing was still trying to find its place. And now, because you've put in a lot of attention and focus and intention, all of these sensations and information found a place inside of your mind. So you know how to put your hand, you know how to put your toes, you know how to balance yourself, and this is making your mind more differentiated. So all of these pieces of information are unique, and by getting into the flow state you are actually integrating all these pieces of information. And once you arrive at the top of this cliff, you start to gently stroke this feather and it becomes whole again. And this is exactly what is happening inside of your mind, because all the differentiated pieces of content, of information, are finding relationships with themselves. And just like this tiny feather, they find different places to connect to each other, and you are going from differentiated pieces of information to integrated pieces of information. And this is what will increase the complexity of your sense of self. So we always have to find a balance between becoming differentiated on the one side, but not too much, because this will just turn you into a selfish person, disconnected from society. And on the other hand, to be an integrated person, to have all the dots connect and also connect to the other people. But if we do this too much, we become too much conformist to society, and there are no autonomous parts that are unique. So we always need to find the balance between differentiation and being unique, and also integration and connecting all these pieces together. And this goes for the person in society as well as the pieces of information inside of our mind that we receive when we are living. And what's happening when we are in the flow state is that this information is actually going in formation, because that's what the word information also means. It comes from being in form. So if we are just doing something that is not requiring any skill or any expression of our sense of self, we are just receiving information. We could call it information because it creates complexity inside of our minds, but there's no integration. And what flow is doing is when we are in flow, we have a really clear goal of where we are going, And this creates a certain intention, and all of these pieces of information that are entering our mind are all going into the same direction, just as when we are individuals in a society or in a group and we all have the same intention, it goes much faster because we all know in which direction we are going. So what happens when we don't integrate any of the information that we receive? We will end up walking on the street having no clear sense of direction. This piece of information is going that way, this piece of information is going the other way, and there is no connection or relationship between any of the pieces of information. And one way that I like to look at this is that when you are on a holiday and you are inside a new city, you've seen the city square, you've seen the park, you've seen the church, and they are all unique and separate entities. You start walking down the bridge and all of a sudden it clicks because you see this church and on the other side there was the park, and now you see the relationship between these different unique elements, and this is what creates integration, and this is also what's happening inside of your mind when you are in the flow state. And now of course the big question is, how do we get into this flow state, this holy state where we forget who we are and everything is going automatically because our attention is just being absorbed or grabbed by the things that we are doing? One of the things that is really important for this is to be an autotelic personality. And what does this autotelic personality mean? Auto means self and telic means goal. So it means that the goal is within itself. So it's not to get to a certain point, although goals are really important, but it's also, as cheesy as it might sound, about the journey and about the activity itself, because we fully emerge in the sensory experiences, which is also a really important aspect. We find all the tiny parts of the environment that we can make distinctions of, and it will give us feedback. And one of the things that really help when you want to produce flow, and you can think back about this to moments where you lost track of time and lost your sense of self, was when it's a goal that you pick to pursue. So it's not something that you have to do for someone else, but it's something that is autotelic. It's an intrinsic reason that you're moving towards a certain goal. And what's also important here is that there's basically two kinds of actions that we can take. And if you want to become a more autotelic person, you have to take more expressive actions. So there's two types of actions that we can make, that we can take. And the one is instrumental actions and the other one is expressive actions. Instrumental actions means that we are just doing something to be able to survive or to cope with the environment, like learning to hunt, learning to craft, learning to write or to read. And expressive actions are actions that we are doing not just to survive, but to show a piece of ourselves that's coming from inside of us, like painting or making poetry or climbing a mountain because we enjoy it. And it's a trait of autotelic personality types. Now, the other thing that's really important for being in the flow state is feedback, because this will show us if we are doing well or not. And even when there's no external feedback telling us whether or not we're doing well, for example, when we are painting, there's still an intrinsic kind of compass that's guiding us and telling us that this certain brush stroke feels good and the other one maybe should be redone. So another example, like I said, when we are climbing, we feel how our fingers are gripping the rocks and how our toes are positioned on the wall. And this is all feedback that we are receiving to get towards this very clear goal that we have of climbing the mountain. And this brings me to the next topic that's really important for having a flow state, which is to have a goal. And I think this whole idea of having a goal is kind of getting a bit cheesy or boring. And personally, I think that we've all heard this a million times before, and it's kind of starting to get a bit boring to have goals and to chop them up into little actionable pieces. But it is really important, because all of the information that's entering our mind, like I said, that's creating complexity inside of our mind when we are doing a certain action, just needs to have a certain intention and a certain goal to know where this fits, where this piece of information should be pointed towards. It's just like having a group of people where everyone is differentiated and they are all autonomous, but they are not working together. And just like this, you also want all of the pieces of information that are entering your senses during the flow state to know in which direction they should be pointed. And then the last thing that's really important to create a flow state is to have the right level of skill. So if we go back to the story of the beginning of this video, not being able to have the right skill would be to look at these little pieces of feather and not knowing how to connect all of them together. And when we improve our skill, it becomes easy for us to connect the dots, and it's not scary for us, and it's also not boring for us. So to make this really actionable, in order for you to find flow in whatever you are doing, try to find intrinsic reasons for doing this, to be autotelic, to find feedback in this. So whatever is telling you that you are moving forwards towards this goal. Also do something that is not too difficult, not too easy, and also try to make distinctions between all the different sensory inputs that you are finding. So examples to make these action points more obvious. Let's say that you want to become better at cooking. So why are you trying to get better at cooking? Is it just because you want to impress people? Or is it because you are curious and you want to find out all the different mixtures of taste? So this would make you an autotelic personality, because the goal is coming from within you. And then we have skill. So you start easy and you start making finer and finer distinctions between all the ingredients that you're using and all the ways of chopping them up and different ways of preparing the ingredients. And this will give you feedback, which is the next important point, by using your senses. So you dive in, you put attention into it, and you're tasting the difference between a potato being baked and a potato being cooked and a potato being fried, and for different durations. And this is the way that you're receiving feedback. You are growing the complexity of your mind, and you're becoming a better cook every time that you're doing it. So the same goes for playing chess and making distinctions here, receiving feedback, having a certain intrinsic goal, or maybe researching tiny feathers because you're curious about what they look under the microscope. Also, I'm going to show you this one under the microscope because I think it looks really cool at the end of the video. Or whether it's about writing a thesis, finding the right level of skill for this, and receiving feedback by using your senses, by creating more complexity in your mind. Every time when you go through flow state, you become a more complex being, and you have to integrate all these pieces of information. So last but not least, if you want to integrate all these loosely hanging pieces of information or information inside of your mind, I would recommend to journal, because this puts everything nicely in order, and you find relationships between things that you didn't see them before, or the other way around, where you thought you knew something and you write it down, you find out that there's actually no relationship. So if you think it was valuable to learn about the autotelic self and how to integrate the knowledge that you're receiving, how to use your senses to receive feedback, then consider subscribing, because I will be making more videos about how to make it as easy as possible for you to pay attention to something so that you can grow as a person and create more complexity and integration inside of your mind. Thanks, and I will see you in the next video. Here's the feather.